What screams, "I live on daddy's money, I cannot go out tomorrow. I have to work," just tell your boss that you want to do it. Don't be afraid of him. Who does he think he is? Quote, "It happened to me, he works in his father's company." Wow, that's ridiculous. Even fathers who employ their sons usually don't put up with that. His boss is probably a manager who is afraid to upset the company owner's son. People who claim to be financially independent, but have never had a job. Independent from financially making any contribution. I'll give them this though. Rich kids are a great way to siphon money from rich daddies and spread it out among the common people. When Princess buys shoes, money goes to the shoe store. When she eats out every breakfast, lunch and dinner, the restaurants get some of that money. Plus sales tax. Really, there is no better way to pry the money from a Wall Street mogul, quite as well as his kids. So, we need more high-spending spoiled brats. Had an employee once who was fresh out of grad school. Paid him $60K. He drove a brand new $120K Mercedes. Lived in a $4K per month penthouse. Wore all bespoke clothing, etc., etc. His salary was definitely a blip on his financial radar. It was what least he's working. True that when they don't understand financial restrictions. There have been a few people I've met who never really thought about not having enough money to do something. Anything from fixing a car to going out to eat. If you say you can't do something because you're broken, they respond with, "Just put it on your credit card." They are likely a candidate. It's one banana, Michael. What could it cost? $10. That coat cost more than your house. Oh, that's how we joke. She doesn't even have a house. The foreign students who go to school in the expensive metropolitan city pay international fees, don't attend classes regularly, and only wear designer brands. Sounds like Vancouver Big C. One of my wife's cousin who is from a rich family said something rude about the local students who have to take out loans to go to their school. I used to work with a guy years ago. We were both in our mid-20s, and both working in junior white-collar jobs, making around the same pay. So while it was okay money, it wasn't amazing. This guy was buying his third home in as many years. Like, he already owned 2 nice houses, and was buying a third and keeping the other 2 to build a mini property portfolio. When I told him that my wife and I couldn't afford a down payment, he responded, "Just ask your family for the money." That's what I quote. When I responded that they didn't have the kind of money, and B, even if they did, we weren't comfortable doing that. He just couldn't understand it. He was visibly confused because it was outside his little bubble. I had a school friend who got enough for a deposit on a house when he was 15. Around £20,000 from a dead relative. He got one and rented it out. The rent covered the mortgage and a bit extra, and stayed living with his parents. When he was 19, he had enough for a second house to rent out. And when he was 23, a third, and so on. Now he owns his own home outright and does not really need to work at 30-ish. Was good for him to get that money so young, and I would be lying if I said I was not jealous. But he invested it damn well. Edit. Yes, his parents helped him with the logistics and acted as guarantors. I don't know the details of who did what or how. I know they got run-down property and did them up. Most weekends he was renovating something or other. Smart kid. I know so many people who, at the same age, would have just blown through that money and have nothing to show for it later. An old co-worker of mine, who was a super nice guy, never made any higher than $40,000. He was able to buy a house while his wife stayed home with his son. Got a brand new Lexus every 2 years or so. Posts pictures of him on traveling on planes all the time in first class and or a private jet. His first year at work he talked to us like all of this common. But I think he learned pretty quickly to keep quiet about his privileged life. Was this because of his parents or because he just goes into mega debt? having names like Gemma Alfio or Mona Lisa. Money, PWEEEEEESE. She's the woo-o-o-o-r-s-t tilde. A friend who doesn't really work much. Has never made more than probably around $100,000 per year. His wife who hasn't worked in 6 years. They are currently building a multi-million-dollar home. Oh yay, her dad owns an oil company. Wish I didn't really have to work to not quite make $100K. The point is that not quite $100,000 is a good salary. But more like a $300,000 house salary. Not a $3 million house salary. Edit. This is all easiness of his job notwithstanding. I used to know a girl who always complained about handouts, and lazy poor people, and pointless charities. I found out the Mustang she drove was a gift from her father. Her parents paid her rent, and her high-paying job was at her mom's company. She honestly didn't see any of that as charity. She got the car, job, and apartment because she's so amazing and deserves it, obviously. God, I absolutely hate people like that. People who don't work for what they have, never worked a day in their life, should not even speak out about people living on the streets. They would be on the streets if it wasn't for their parents. I pity them, as they will never value or enjoy stuff like warm water. It's one of the most important lessons my parents taught me, value. Also, this leads me to hate the parents, as they spoiled the girl and not her, cause she would have a different nature if raised properly. An expensive first car as soon as you are old enough to drive. My first thought too. Honestly, not even an expensive car, just a new car. New cars cost $20,000 plus these days, and you can get sensible used cars much cheaper. For someone to get a brand new car off the lot for their first car, that's the parents buying it. An expensive car is just even more obvious. Have a friend who's only 18. His first car is a freaking 2019 Range Rover Sport. Cost his parents $70K. I want an Oompa Loompa now. Before you know it, you've poisoned yourself because you've eaten experimental product you were strictly warned not to touch. For a period of time in the early 2000s, I lived in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. Rents in some parts of Williamsburg were and still are ridiculously expensive. I couldn't afford to live in the vicinity of the cool area, otherwise known as Bedford Avenue. Instead, I roomed with 5 other people in an converted 3-bedroom apartment about a 15 to 20-minute walk away from Bedford. Every so often I'd find myself at a cafe on Bedford Avenue and see all the faux, starving artists sitting there looking like they'd just rolled out of bed for hours on end. It was clear they didn't have anywhere they needed to be. Rents for a 1BR near Bedford were often north of $2,000 per month, and that was in 2001-2002. No way in hell you're 18 to 22 years old, and paying your own bills working part-time if you live there. Definitely know the type you're talking about. Be glad you don't know those same people now, because you'll eventually hear them talk about how they spent a few years in Brooklyn, slumming it so they could speak with authenticity on having to struggle. Quote, they might have even tried to get a job on a street team slapping posters up or in a record store. That way they can always have something to respond with in case someone accuses them of living off their parents or being out of touch. I had been recently dumped, so I took an alone trip up to NYC in the fall of '07. I took a group shuttle from LaGuardia to the YMCA I was staying at. There were about 2 groups consisting of 3 to 4 guys each. Overheard both groups separately discussing high-end fashion as well as their plans not to look like tourists. Most of the guys were wearing stuff straight out of Urban Outfitters or a thrift store. Yet both groups got off at some of the most expensive hotels in Midtown. You should have seen the looks I got when the driver called out the YMCA and I shuffled through everybody to hop out. If you are traveling alone, I consider the YMCA's of NYC to be the best kept secret in the city. I got a 1-bedroom queen-size mattress, a whole mini fridge W freezer, a 36 inches flat-screen HD TV, and a kick-ass view off the city, all for $70 something per night. The place has amazing housekeeping and fresh sheets and towels brought daily if you want. You also have full access to the pools and gyms. It's staffed 24/7 and in the heart of Manhattan on the west side of 63rd, less than a block from the Park and a few from Columbus Circle. Trust me, if you're going to NYC alone, you don't need crazy amenities or a huge room. You should be out in the city. The room is pretty much for crashing and getting ready. Haha, you clearly know exactly the type of Brooklyn hipster I'm talking about. I'm sure every big city has a similar scene somewhere. My brother, who lived within walking distance of me at the time, and I used to laugh at their attempts to look as though they were struggling financially. I have a friend who told me he has distant cousins who live off a trust fund that pays them $10,000 a month each and they're having trouble getting by. If you're really done with money, you could make that money disappear like that. I just started to date a guy, not too long after I lost a job. I took a roommate in to help me pay the rent and he got mad. Said that he will be less comfortable because of the privacy and couldn't understand that I put money before the relationship. I said that I will not spit on $500 per month and that I won't be able to pay. His solution: ask money from my parents and wait a couple of months till he moves in and saves me. After a fight, I mostly discover that he still lived in his parents' home at 30. His whole shtick about travel is my philosophy suddenly seemed less cool. I broke up that week.